Montez Sweat headed to the Chicago Bears, and Chase Young is off to join the San Francisco 49ers. We're going to talk about it all and what it means for the future right now on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're getting your podcast, and you can continue this conversation with me by becoming a Locked On Commanders Insider. Join the Locked On Commanders Insiders, where you get news, inside scoops, exclusive content delivered directly to your phone and one-on-one conversations with me via text message. I have been texting Commanders fans all day long as news continues to break and develop. Join the Locked On Commanders Insiders now and be in the know all the time. Just go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to sign up. Real quick, Insider Fran, you are not getting my broadcast for some reason in group or in individual. I have put in a ticket with the Subtext support people, so we are working on getting that fixed. I apologize to you, but I promise that it will get fixed. I'm David Harrison, your host for the show on Twitter, dharrison82, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderCountry.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers and everydayers. You know, I always appreciate you for coming through the program. If you're new, I also appreciate you for coming through. If you like it, hit subscribe, come back for even more. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers, you get $150 in bonus bets when you win any $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the future of the Washington Commanders, at least how I see it as it stands today. Of course, everything is very fluid, and we'll continue to update it as we go along. But the NFL trade deadline has come and gone. We're about 5 minutes past the deadline, and the day started with the trading of Montez Sweat to the Chicago Bears. We started the day thinking it might be the Falcons. It was the Bears. I jumped on with Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears, and we discussed this trade. By the way, this conversation you're about to see was recorded prior to the Chase Young trade, so we will obviously talk about that as well.
Talk about this big Montez Sweat trade. David, I guess start from here. Can you give us a perspective from the Commanders side? Like, why did they trade away a good young pass rusher like Montez Sweat? What's in it for you guys besides obviously a high second round pick?
Yeah, you know, I think when you're looking at the future, right, NFL teams have to manage a lot of things. First, you got to manage talent, you got to manage personality, you got to manage capital, and capital is really, I think, where this comes down to, because you're talking money and you're talking draft picks. Draft picks obviously typically relate to your future. Money relates to your now. So moving forward, you don't have a limited amount of money because, I mean, the Commanders are estimated to have over $80 million in cap space next offseason. But are you really going to pay everybody? The bottom line is no. So if you already know you're not going to pay everybody, the next task is figuring out who is least likely to get paid by you. And now the question is, do we wait for a 2025 compensatory pick, or do we want that 2024 right now pick? And the Washington Commanders obviously opting to go with the 2024 right now pick, because that gives you the opportunity to build faster. Plus, you're not getting second round compensatory picks for anybody. So getting a second round pick is much better than any compensatory pick you would have gotten. Plus, it's a year earlier.
Yeah, and I suppose coming from a Chicago Bears second round pick compared to some other team's second round pick, you're looking at what's likely going to be one of the first 5 picks in that second round, if not one of the first 2 or 3 picks in that second round, which is pretty close to a first round pick you're getting in exchange for a guy you drafted in the first round, got 5 good years out of, and then got essentially pretty darn close to the same competition. But he was the 26th overall pick. So if this is the 36th pick, for example, even 4 or 5 picks into the draft, and that's basically trading down 10 slots and having gotten 5 years of Montez Sweat, seems like a pretty good return on investment for Washington. For Chicago, can you give us sort of an overview scouting report of Montez Sweat? I mean, I think we've seen him be a consistent pass rusher, but he's never been, the threshold, the 10 sack guy. But it seems like a guy who's been consistent enough to be maybe more valuable than just like what his peak might be in those years.
Yeah, I think the thing with Montez, what you have to understand is that I think he's basically reached his ceiling, right? So like, I know you're going to go back and you're going to now study more Washington games. I know Bears fans all loved watching the Commanders game this year, but now you're going to go back and watch that with different eyes on it, right? Like, he's a good, solid pass rusher at this stage in his career. And never say never. A guy meets a different coach or different scheme and it sparks growth. And I certainly hope it for Montez, because Montez Sweat as a human being is a very good, humble, human being. But I think he's kind of reached the ceiling of who he's going to be. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what it means is, if he's going to be your Aiden Hutchinson, I think you're going to have some problems. He's going to need a running mate. He's going to need another player opposite of him. I think the most frustrating thing with a guy like Montez Sweat is sometimes you don't see him pull out that counter move, that second move to that end. It's not because he stops trying. It's just kind of because he doesn't always pull out that counter. Montez has always been known as a pressure guy. He gets a lot of pressure on quarterbacks. The question coming into this season is, can he close more consistently and become a double-digit sack guy? And he's on pace to do that this season. And certainly, I think he's made some growth in that area this year. So now it's going to be on the Chicago Bears staff to unlock that even more as they look to develop him moving forward.
Do you think that's why they didn't choose to pay him? I mean, you talked about earlier, like you can't pay everybody, but they are going to pay somebody. I guess they already paid Daron Payne, but they might pay one more. It might be Jonathan Allen. I guess it could potentially be Chase Young, depending on how the rest of the year goes. But like, why? Like, I think Bears fans see it's like, oh, great, good young pass rusher that the Bears got. Well, there's a reason why the Commanders chose not to pay him. Or how much of that is just that he was the one that maybe they could get the most for on the trade market versus the guy that maybe they didn't want to pay as much as other guys?
Yeah, I think it's really just he's the most that you get the best return. He's the one that you get the most return for, and honestly, I'll tell you, the media circle here in DC is kind of split. Like, half of us seem to think that Chase Young is legitimately potentially going to be traded. The other half believes there's no way they get rid of both Montez and Chase Young in the same season and then have to come back next year and potentially replace both of them. I'm kind of on the side that I think anything is possible, and I do like what James Smith-Williams, Casey Toohill, the backup defensive ends for the Washington Commanders, have brought to the field when they've gotten their opportunities. They're not elite by any means either, but I think they're serviceable replacements and certainly can play their role that Washington's asked them to play over the years. So I really think that coming into this, basically, the Commanders were open to both guys, talking about both guys, and it was just kind of like which offer was going to blow them away sooner. And really, just kind of taking the temperature around the league. I mean, up until about 24 hours before we hit Tuesday, so about Monday morning, really there have been no solid reports that anybody was really going after Chase Young. The Bears were the team that were rumored to maybe be the most interested in Chase Young, but obviously, they decided to go with Montez Sweat, and it depends on who you talk to, but most of us around here seem to think you were going to give more for Montez than you would for Chase. So it means the Bears chose to pay more to get what they think is the better player, even if it's from a health and consistency standpoint, rather than a potential standpoint. But Lauren, my question from the Chicago side. So you already mentioned, like, Washington, obviously good compensation for a guy like Montez Sweat. It's good compensation here. I think most Commanders fans, even if they don't like seeing Montez leave, they agree. Do you think that the Chicago Bears paid too much to get a pass rusher like Montez Sweat?
I think you always want to get the best pass rusher possible. And I think you have that wish, like you said, like he's maybe not that like elite 1A pass rusher, but like a good running mate type pass rusher. And you feel like, ooh, you just want a little bit more. But at the same time, the Bears are A, desperate for pass rushers, and B, like, it is still a second round pick, a high second round pick. Yes. But I think the math for Chicago comes down to, like, you look at the free agent class of pass rushers, assuming some guys are going to get re-signed, they're probably not going to get premier pass rushers hitting free agency. And you look in the draft, there's not going to be a pass rusher at the top of the draft where the Bears are picking that they really feel like is going to be the elite guy that you pick in the top 3, top 5 of this draft class. So then it comes down to, would you rather have Montez Sweat or a pass rusher you take with that high second round pick? I mean, obviously you have to pay Sweat. There's a little bit more to the math there than that. But if the goal is we need to find a way to get a good pass rusher, and you feel like your only options are that second round or this trade, I feel like you got to take the trade at that point and say, this is better than we could get anywhere else. And maybe it's not ideal, but it seems a lot less risky than the last second round pick they traded for a player from another team that didn't work out so well. Montez went a little bit more proven and consistent than the Chase Claypool. And if anything, like, the bar is so low for expectations here that Sweat should be able to at least meet, if not exceed, those kind of expectations.
Yeah, I promise you this. Montez Sweat's not going to be late to any meetings. And he's certainly going to give all the effort that you ask from out of practice and studying. So I can tell you that you're at least getting that. You're getting a good locker room guy, a good teammate. Final question I have for you, Lauren. A lot of people were surprised that the Chicago Bears are buyers here in this trade deadline. Were you surprised?
Yes and no. I mean, so I guess the answer should be no, because it doesn't feel like quite the same style of buying, right? I think of buying at the trade deadline as like, all right, we got to leverage our future assets to really win now. And like, sure, Montez Sweat does make the Bears better right now, absolutely. But this trade for Sweat is not about 2023, right? This trade is about 2024, 25, 26, however long the next contract is that you sign Montez Sweat to. Plus, you have a head coach who will likely be fired, but at the very least is still trying to save his job, and a general manager whose job security is very much up in the air. So they have some incentive to try and bolster the team and do a little bit better this season to get one more year to keep working for this team. So that second round pick won't do them any good if they're fired before they get a chance to even use it. So might as well use it now to go in on getting a better player that's not totally mortgaging your future, right? It would be weird if they had traded for a 35-year-old pass rusher where it's like, okay, why are they going all in on trying to win that now? But I think Sweat is a young enough player with more of a long enough term tail on the end of this that it is buying, but it's not the traditional sense of like salvaging your future just to win now.
All right, that was Lauren Cox from Locked On Bears talking with me about the trade for Montez Sweat. Of course, Chase Young was eventually traded before the trade deadline. We will talk about that next coming up here on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that thanks to our friends over at DoorDash. If the game just went to a timeout, that's time for you to order in. With DoorDash is at halftime, that's ordering time. The 2-minute warning is your cue to get ordering. Whatever or whenever the game clock stops, it's time for you to order in with DoorDash. Why root for the Washington Commanders on an empty stomach? You wouldn't do it at FedEx. You wouldn't do it on the road. Why would you do it at home? Order on DoorDash and save on football watch party favorites. Order chips, dips, nachos, or everything you need to make your own nachos on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. I spent the night in DC over the weekend covering Wizards games and Commanders games, had 3 games in 3 days that I had to cover. So I hit up DoorDash, and one of my favorite new spots that I recently discovered, chicken and whiskey, got myself a half chicken, some Caribbean coleslaw, and some donut churros. They were delicious. So if you haven't tried them, I highly recommend that you do. All of your favorite restaurants and stores are there on the app, so you can shop everything you need to get game day ready. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order after downloading the DoorDash app. Enter the code LOCKED20 or LOCKED23 to get that. Again, don't forget promo code LOCKED23 for 50% off up to a $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Subject to change. Terms apply. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, your first view today and every day. Football season is here. Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On NFL Kickoff Live. Every Friday, Locked On is going to go live at 2 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On NFL YouTube channel. And your hosts, Tanitra Batiste, Jarvis Davis, and Kyle Krabs are going to break down every game on the NFL schedule to get you ready for your team's matchup, your fantasy lineups, and your betting angles, plus a lot more. Plus, get in-depth local analysis from our stable of NFL hosts across the country who know these teams better than anyone else. Find Locked On NFL Kickoff Live every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern on any Locked On NFL YouTube channel, including right here at Locked On Commanders. If you are with me live, drop your thoughts, reactions, questions, comments in the live chat, and we will get to those here in just a little bit. But we got to get to the second trade of the day that the Washington Commanders executed, and that, of course, was the trade sending defensive end Chase Young to the San Francisco 49ers in exchange for a third-round pick. Now, there was a little bit of confusion, some clarification needed about the trade terms. So Chase Young, with his expiring contract, goes to the San Francisco 49ers, who, if you've been keeping up with the 49ers at all, if you're an NFL fan in general, or if you're listening to Brian Peacock and Croc over at Locked On 49ers, they have had some recent struggles, had some injuries, had some issues. And I think that what they know is that they need to get their defense championship ready because they need to pick up their offense just a little bit. So they're going after a guy like Chase Young, seeing if they can tap into that remaining potential, get him on board with their program, and potentially lead them to a championship run. Of course, the interesting part of this, right? The Washington Commanders will host the San Francisco 49ers Week 17, New Year's Eve in FedEx Field. So we have not seen the last of Chase Young. We will see him again very, very soon. It is not the 87th pick overall, however. The 87th pick in the third round is the San Francisco 49ers organic pick that they own well, it's projected right now that they own. but it is the 98th overall pick. The 98th overall pick is a compensatory pick, but here's where the confusion came in. There are some people who believe that a compensatory pick, if the 49ers were not be able to retain Chase Young, then the Washington Commanders would actually have to wait for 2025 for that compensatory pick. That is not the case. You cannot trade picks that have not been awarded yet. What this 98th compensatory pick is a special compensatory pick that the San Francisco 49ers were awarded when Rand Carthon got hired to be the general manager of the Tennessee Titans. So this is a compensatory pick for the minority hiring program that the NFL has in place. The Niners were able to get that. So they already have been awarded this compensatory pick, which is why they can then trade it. It is the 98th overall pick, according to Tankathon. Now, what people are talking about is if Chase Young doesn't re-sign with the 49ers for one reason or another, signs a big contract elsewhere, the 49ers may actually get a third-round comp pick in 2025, in which case they get Chase Young for the rest of this season. Then they get a third-round pick next year, or 2025, so following the next season, and essentially get that pick back just a year later. And that's where the genius of John Lynch comes in. The Washington Commanders, on the other hand, get a comp pick. It is somebody else's comp pick. It's going to be before the rest of the comp picks, but after the regular picks, and they get it in 2024, whereas if they let Chase Young walk and sign somewhere else, they wait till 2025. So essentially they get to accelerate their third round pick, their compensatory pick, if all of that makes sense. Hopefully it does. So that is the end state. The end state is the Washington Commanders get number 98 in the 2024 NFL draft for Chase Young, which means Montez Sweat obviously got more, or brought more in compensation for the Washington Commanders than Chase Young did. Why? Well, part of it is because they're not that big. There's not that big of a difference in age, right? Obviously, Montez Sweat has been in the league longer, but there's not a huge age difference there. So that's not such a concern. The other part is production. Montez Sweat's production over his career, he's getting a sack about every 80 or so snaps. Chase Young is getting a sack for every 100 plus snaps in his career, even when he is healthy. And then finally, you have the health concerns. Chase Young coming off of a major injury, 2 knee surgeries, had the injuries earlier this preseason that cost him a game of the regular season. So you just look at those things all combined, and that's why NFL teams just simply did not want to pay for Chase Young as much as they were willing to pay for a guy like Montez Sweat. Something that we talked about in our trade deadline preview episode. This defense has got to find teeth. We know the defense has talent. This defense has got to find teeth, and right now they're going to turn to Casey Toohill and James Smith-Williams, and they're going to try to see, do either of those guys have teeth? Andre Jones is going to be a guy. KJ Henry is going to be a guy that hasn't gotten a lot of burn up to now. He's going to get some more burn coming up here very, very soon. And they're going to see, do any of these guys have some teeth? And honestly, when you look at the statistics here, we know Montez Sweat, 6.5 sacks so far this season. Chase Young, 5 sacks this season. Both these guys have been doing really well, especially when you compare to what they've done in the rest of their careers, even when healthy for Chase Young. But Casey Toohill, guys, I don't know if people understand, he's got 4 sacks right now. He's only 1 sack behind Chase Young, 2.5 behind Montez Sweat. But Casey Toohill has played 20% of the defensive snaps. Now, I'm not saying the Washington Commanders are looking at Casey Toohill and saying, oh, he's better than either of these guys. But what I think they're saying is they understand that they want to move forward. They need to reset a little bit. They don't want to keep pouring money into already invested draft picks. They want to kind of reset the market, reset the money, and offers themselves some flexibility. And they have 2 capable guys here. There's not a group across the roster. If you trade your 2 starters from any other position group on this roster, their backups are not nearly as good or as capable as the ones here. Now, we'll see how that turns into wins, or if it turns into wins for the Washington Commanders moving forward. But I think that is part of the inspiration of why these 2 players were moved versus, say, Jonathan Allen, say Cam Curl, all those things. Because when you look behind those types of players, you don't have near the amount of talent and the amount of ability and investment that you do from the defensive end group. Let's hit the live chat real quick. I know a lot of people already saying that they're kind of missing these guys. Sweezy talking about already missing them. Sergio saying that 2 of his favorite players are already out of here. Mint Diggity said brutal. New day in Washington. We're going to talk about what that new day means here in just a little bit. And how do I think James Smith-Williams and Case Toohill are going to handle things? I think both of these players are very capable, talented defensive ends. I think the key with James Smith-Williams and with Casey Toohill is that they're guys who go out there and they do their job. And we've heard this talked about not just this season, but for years past, right? Jack Del Rio's talked about guys playing off script, freelancing, doing their own thing. And they all kind of stopped short of calling out people specifically. But if you go back a couple years, the comments were kind of coming out, and a lot of us were associating them with Chase Young. And I think that when Chase got injured. You saw James Smith-Williams come in primarily. Casey Tuhill got some rotational work when Montez was out here and there. You saw Casey Tuhill get in. I think the best thing both those guys do is they both have high motors. They never stop on a play, and they do what they're assigned to do. If they're designed to set the edge, they set the edge. If it's your job to collapse inside, they collapse inside. They don't ever go outside their script, outside the boundaries, trying to do more than they should. That's where their skill set is going to come in the most, and we'll see how Jack Del Rio can turn that into production. We've got some other comments here. I see one that's already kind of making me laugh a little bit that we will get to here in just a moment on Locked On Commanders, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're going to do that thanks to our friends over at FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, you're getting $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. The Washington Commanders are 3-point underdogs going on the road against the New England Patriots. So if you think this new look Commanders, if you think this addition by subtraction, maybe the defense gets sparked a little bit by the losses of Montez Sweat and Chase Young. If you think they can pull off the upset against the New England Patriots, you put a $5 money line bet on them to win. If they win and you're a new customer, you get $150 in bonus bets on top of that $6.30 win you just notched for yourself. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to do it right now and get in on the action. The app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and of course, money line. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get your NFL season winning. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League. All right, wrapping up this episode of Locked On Commanders post-NFL trade deadline episode. Montez Sweat, Chase Young, no longer on the roster. Chase Young heading to the San Francisco 49ers. Montez Sweat headed to the Chicago Bears. Let's hit the live chat a little bit again. William says it really kind of depends on what Washington does in the draft next year, and absolutely. I mean, any type of draft haul, whether you consider it great or you consider it not so much, what is important is what you do with those picks. And you know, it's going to change a lot between now and next April, obviously. But if you're looking at it right now, I would like to see that first round pick put on the offensive line. And I would say probably a second round pick, a third round pick put on the defensive line, and then probably another third round pick on the offensive line as well. Let's go heavy on the offensive line. You got a second round pick there to get a receiver, a running back. We'll see linebacker, right? We'll see what the need is when the time comes. That's just kind of off the top of my head. Let's see. Todd Sullivan. This was a pretty funny one. How much can we get for Ron? You know what? You actually can trade for coaches. I just don't think anybody's going to trade for Ron Rivera at this point in time. Let's see. Yeah. So stockpiling draft picks for the future. I think that's really what this is exactly. And then you want to see what you guys have in these players. And I think James Smith-Williams, and Casey Tuhill, both of these guys are potential, right? And you have to remember, both of those guys also have expiring contracts. And yes, the Washington Commanders have $80+ million in cap space, expected to be for next year's offseason, but that doesn't mean they want to spend all 80 million of it, right? And they especially don't want to spend a quarter of that money on just two guys. They want to go ahead and see if they can spread it out. I do think that this actually helps the potential and the likelihood of Cam Curl getting extended, maybe not during the season, but at least getting re-signed in the offseason. So I really do think that helps that. And you might see this team go the route of sign a defensive end, draft a couple of defensive ends as well, mix them in there with KJ Henry, Casey Tuhill, these guys. But we'll see what these guys have yet to prove. That's basically the bottom line on this. It's an opportunity for Casey Tuhill and James Smith-Williams to show the Washington Commanders ownership, this team's leadership while they're here. And if they're not here at the end of the season, the new team leadership, put it on tape, show them why you need to be a part of the future and a part of the solution. Lucaholic's podcast talks about this, asks, do I think that Ron is going to be here at the end of the week? Yes, I do think that Ron Rivera and his staff will be here at the end of the week. I don't think this is indicative of an impending firing. I think what's going to happen now is there's been a challenge levied, right? There's been a challenge and there's been a notice put out that if you're not viewed as part of the solution to what's plaguing this franchise, you will be removed, and you will be removed, fired, released, traded, whatever it is. And so it's up to you, and that's coaches and players, to show the franchise that you are a part of the solution for this team. There's 9 games left to play, if my math is working right now. That's a lot of time for all of these players and even the coaches, to be quite honest with you, to prove that they can be a part of that solution. So no, I do not think that Ron Rivera and his staff are getting fired by the end of this week. So to recap what all of this really means, the Commanders are now projected to have the number 11, 37, 42, 73rd, and 98th picks in the 2024 NFL draft. Again, that third round pick from the 49ers is a special compensatory pick awarded to them for having a minority candidate hired above the position he was serving with the 49ers when he got hired as the Titans GM. So that is why it is the 98th pick. So yes, the 98th pick is essentially a fourth round pick. It's right at the end of the third round. But a second round pick, unless the Bears go on a run. So Commanders fans, you are now not a Bears fan. Whoever the Bears are playing, you are a fan of that team. That 37th overall pick is essentially a first round pick, but obviously you don't get the fifth year option. But look, if there's talent enough and the Commanders want to get it, whether it's this staff or another staff, you take that 37th pick, you take that 98th pick, you package them, and maybe you move up to the 32nd pick with, whoever won the Super Bowl, and you get that fifth year option on another guy, get the 11th, the 32nd, and then you still have the 42nd and the 73rd potentially sitting there. What this looked like in last year's NFL draft, if you want to draw parallels, last year's NFL draft, the 11th, 37th, 42nd, 73rd, and 98th picks would have gotten you Peter Skoronski, the offensive tackle out of Northwestern, Auburn edge Derek Hall, Luke Musgrave, the tight end out of Oregon State, Jalen Hyatt, the wide receiver out of Tennessee, who's with the Giants now, and you probably remember him, and defensive tackle Siaki Ika. Those are pretty good players, and that's not to say that's who the Commanders would have drafted, obviously, but it just kind of shows you the caliber of players that are going to likely be available at the time of these picks. Something interesting, Diana Rossini reported that Commanders ownership had a strong hand in getting Chase Young and Montez Sweat dealt. And that was something that we tried to ask Ron Rivera about yesterday. He did not want to talk about it, which we get, of how much the ownership was kind of dictating this stuff versus how much was the coaching staff. And look, I think that this is essentially the ownership saying, look, this isn't good enough. 3-5 is not good enough. And if 3-5 is not good enough, we're going to take action while we can. You know what I mean? Like if the trade deadline was in November, perhaps Josh Harris would have let this coaching staff have until November to figure this thing out, but the trade deadline is when it is. So for Josh Harris and Magic Johnson and Mitchell Rales and all those guys, and I can tell you, like, I know it hasn't been publicized as much, but these guys are around. This ownership group is around on an almost daily basis. They're at every game. They're at practices regularly. They are tuned in and they are watching and they are observing. They're elbow deep in this team, guys. I can tell you that right now. They basically said, look, the time is now. We're going to make some moves. Here are the moves we're going to make. I can speculate about all the reasons why they want to make those moves, but the bottom line is they decided Chase Young, Montez Sweat, they're not going to be a part of our future moving forward. So let's go ahead and get what we can for them now, and not only get what we can for them now, but get it a year ahead of what we would get it for if we just let them walk away. Robbie says that someone said that they can't remember who said it to them, but if Ron is fired, it will be after the Week 13 game to take advantage of the bye. Yeah, that's part of it. The Week 13 bye week is big. Really, December football eliminated from the playoffs. Like that's really kind of the realm where if somebody's going to be fired, that's probably when it's going to be because that's when you're going to start seeing coaching candidates start to kind of come out from the works there. Mike Vandenberg saying the 2024 draft is going to be fun. It is. You know what I mean? I'm hoping the rest of this season is fun too, but 2024 draft preparation is really going to be a lot of fun. So thank you, everybody, for joining me here on this live episode. If you're not joining me live, I appreciate you coming through post live as always. Coming up tomorrow. Look, today's supposed to be AAR time. I'm supposed to have a mailbag. I'm going to try to combine the two, do a little bit of AAR, do a little bit of mailbag. We will get through the week as best we can. Obviously, we're going to sit down with Ron Rivera, so a lot more conversation about Montez and Chase is going to come. I've also got it scheduled to sit down with Brian Peacock of Locked On 49ers. So like you just saw with Lauren and I, we will come back and we will talk about these trades as well. This trade situation is going to dominate a lot of what we talk about, guys, but I will get as much content into you as I possibly can. In the meantime, you got questions or comments, throw them into the YouTube comment section, hit me on Twitter, or text them directly to me by becoming a Lock Insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Again, Fran, I got you. We are working on a solution. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view today and every day. Until we speak again, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.